We're going to start out our discussion by going through the most recent version of the frequently made mistakes that I've seen based on my review of what people have submitted to this point. I've reviewed almost everything that has been submitted to this point, and so what I'm going to do now is kind of talk about some of the problems I've seen. So first of all, make sure you run the unit tests for both the movies module and the movies-ex module. Most people are doing it, but what I'm seeing is some very strange results, very strange screenshots indeed. So there'll be people who have mistakes in their code that are clearly failing the tests, but they'll have test results that look like everything passed. So I'm not quite sure what's going on there, but make sure that you run the tests. Make sure that you run all the tests. Some people were just running like the black box test and having a screenshot of that. It's important for you to be able to make sure that those tests are passing because that's what we're going to grade your program on. So make sure you run the test, make sure you run the right test, make sure you run all the tests. Another thing, so this is kind of a recap of what we had talked about before, but some people were still struggling with it. So it's okay to use an if-else statement in find matches async, just that one method. Some other people are doing it elsewhere. We'll talk about that in a second. So what you would do is you would check to see whether there was a match. If so, you return the movie. Otherwise, you're going to throw the no such match exception as part of the else portion of the if-else statement. So you should be able to figure out how to write that code. Another way to do it is to either write a private helper method, like the one I have here called throw no such match exception, which just throws the no such match exception. And then you can use the ternary operator and stay more or less within the functional paradigm. You don't have an if-else statement explicitly. Or something else that I've done, which is also pretty cool, is my no such match exception now contains a static method called throw no such match exception. And so I can kind of consolidate everything in one place. So that's another thing to consider as well. But whatever you do, make sure that you are throwing the exception properly. Coming down here, a lot of people, for some strange reason that I don't quite understand, are not including the decode query method here. And that should not pass the test. The test should fail. So make sure you're using the latest version of the tests. Make sure you have pulled the repository from my repository to get the latest version. Maybe that's what's going on, I'm not sure. But make sure you have that in there, and if you're failing your test, that's probably why. Also, the current tests don't test for this, but the next round will. Use the web utils decode query method here rather than using the URL decoder decode method. This one isn't really such a big deal, but we'll see a little bit later that there's a more complicated, incorrect way of doing things, which will definitely benefit from using the helper method. Please don't use a local variable here. Just say search, open paren, list of, regex query, close paren. You don't need to have that. Local variable doesn't do anything for you. Down here, we're back in the list version of search, and this is also missing something important. It's also missing the decoding of the regex queries, and make sure that you put that in properly. We'll talk about something else people are doing here in a second. Make sure that you have the names match properly. So let's see, what was the problem here? So I think the actual problem was it was like, I don't know, do search or something. No, sorry. It would this code here. I see the problem. The problem is make sure that you have this, not that, because otherwise you'll get really strange errors. This is the example of the more long-winded, incorrect way of decoding the list of regular expression queries. Don't write this stuff out with a stream and a map and two lists. Use web utils decode queries. It makes everything simple. That's why it's there, to kind of refactor and consolidate that code. Down here, make pattern lists. Please split these into two separate map calls. That was kind of a holdover from assignment 1B's, frequently made mistakes. And because you're now doing the decoding in the controller, which is arguably where it belongs, you don't need to also do a decode here. So remove that. That should also be caught by the tests. So when I start seeing these kind of bugs in the code, it concerns me because it looks like people aren't running the tests, or if they are, they're not paying attention to what the results are. Down here, this particular method is calling the wrong function. So get matches for patterns should be calling a method called task. I try as much as possible to have methods that are called within the fork methods calling task. And the problem here is that the scope.fork is missing. So the scope.fork method is missing, and the call to the task method is missing. So this is the wrong call in the wrong place. So of course you're getting strange results, most probably either runtime and or test time errors. This implementation is just too complicated. There's no need to do all this stuff. If you go read the specification, it tells you what to do. There's way too much extra things going on here that you don't need to have at all. Down here, this is not the right way to throw the no such match exception. I'm not even sure what this is trying to do, but it's definitely not going to be throwing the no such match exception. So remember, there's two ways to do this. You either go ahead and use an if-else statement and have it thrown that way, or you go ahead and use that little technique by having a separate method that throws an exception. And then you can use it with the appropriate syntax, the question mark, colon, ternary operator syntax. But this is not the right way to do that. It's part of the assignment to know how to do this, by the way. Down here, you don't need to use an if-else statement here in this method. Find match async does not need an if-else statement. And also, you don't need to have the open curly brace, close curly brace. You can simplify this code by just having it be a very simple expression. Down here, this should be 2 lines. I went back and forth on this one. This code is correct. For testing purposes, it made it easier for us to test it as 2 separate calls. It gets tricky when we start trying to test with white box testing code like this with the mocking framework we've got. So please just split that into a call to scope.join and then a call to scope.result. And also, make sure you return the value provided by scope.result rather than returning movie. So that's also something that needs to be improved. You don't need a local variable here for the pattern matcher. It's not wrong. It's just a little bit more clean if you string them together with the fluent interface style. And now this is looking back. This call to distinct is needed for assignment 1B, and it's also, sorry, it's needed for assignment 1C in the movies module, but you don't need it in the assignment 1C movies EX module, because that is being handled in the way that we've structured the concurrency by using ShutdownOnSuccess and so on. And then finally, this code should call the future utils helper method to simplify the logic. That doesn't have to be written out here. This should also be caught by the unit test, so please make sure that you're checking your code and making sure that that works properly. So that's the end of the current walkthrough of frequently made mistakes. The assignment 1C is due tonight. As I said, I think I've reviewed about half the solutions that have been submitted so far. And so if you have not submitted your code, please make sure you fix these things before you submit. And if you have submitted your code, please make sure you fix these things for your final submission, which will be graded.